Why am I currently thinking of peanut farms and the secret tape of LBC presenters? If anyone can get the correct answer to both of those questions, I shall give you the money myself, in the immortal words of Les Dennis. Why am I currently thinking of peanut farms and the secret tape of LBC presenters saying things that they wish they could forget? You might get one of them, but there's no earthly way anybody's going to get both of them. The second question has a relatively easy answer. Whenever I say, is there a German word for? Is there a German word for that feeling that you kind of want to look away from something but you can't, or that you don't really want to talk about something but you also really do, or that you've asked this question so many times that you must have probably got to the correct answer but you can't resist the urge to ask it again in case there's a different answer? And you keep sending me suggestions of what that word may be, and I look at them very, very closely, thinking to myself, they're trying to get me to say something rude on the radio without noticing. So you send me these German words that may have a little thing hidden in the middle of them. These German-looking words. They're definitely not even German words, I don't think, in most cases. So I can't read any of them out. I haven't got the confidence. No, I can't do it. Maybe that one's all right. The German word for realization. But that's not what I'm looking for, Davey. I'm looking for one of those compound words, like Schadenfreude, that we haven't got an actual single word equivalent for. Some of these words, they're so long they look like a small town in Wales. The German words that combine countless different constituent parts to convey something very simple and very, very specific. But I haven't quite nailed it yet. Yeah, all right, so well done on the peanut farms. It is Jimmy Carter. I think that is a figure who springs into many minds whenever peanut farms are mentioned. But why specific? Oh, that's nice from David. Trumpenfreude. We're all suffering from Trump. Well, no, is it? I don't know. Peanut farm, because he was a peanut farmer. But why am I thinking of Jimmy Carter's peanut farm specifically today? Why do you think that is? Specifically today. The actions of the latest US president, perhaps, prompting me to think of what Jimmy Carter did when he became president of the United States. So Jimmy Carter put his peanut farm into a blind trust. This is something that used to be absolutely commonplace, but is no longer. He put it into a blind trust so that nothing he did as president could have involved any personal gain, as it were, as a consequence of him owning a peanut farm. He didn't sell it, as some people have claimed, but he put it into a blind trust, which allows you to retain ownership of an asset while transferring management to another person or entity. How the world turns, eh? I mean, not only are there claims that Donald Trump has himself trousered $2.4 billion, his own businesses, during his first presidential term. Remember, he even uses his own hotels to put up Secret Service personnel. And there are reports reaching us now that he's charging $5 million a pop just to have dinner with him. And he's not allowed to run again, so it can't be for campaign funds. They'll claim it's for the library, the presidential library. Every president gets to build a library. Did you know that? I've actually been to FDR's. It's a magical place. But Donald Trump doesn't give the impression of ever having read a book. He hasn't even read the book that he supposedly wrote, according to the ghostwriter of The Art of the Deal. So the idea that he's raising millions and millions and millions of dollars to build a library seems a little fanciful. But just consider for a moment Jimmy Carter putting his family peanut farm into a blind trust so that there could be no perception, let alone possibility, of corruption or self-interest. And then listen to something that happened on the White House lawn yesterday. And again, there should be a German word for this, shouldn't there? The photograph I saw online on Blue Sky, if you're interested in my platform of choice, the photograph I saw, I just presumed was a joke. Did you? Do you know the one that I'm talking about? Even now, even after all these years, all these scandals, all these shocks, all these confirmations that we are not just down the rabbit hole, but absolutely broken, that the United States of America is close to collapse in the context of norms, in the context of core values. close to collapse. But I still thought that can't be real. That photograph can't be real. And it was a photograph of Donald Trump clutching in his hand a piece of paper that looked like the sort of thing a Tesla salesman would have in his hand were you to turn up on the forecourt of a Tesla dealership at some point later today. So he'd have in front of him, the red one is 40,000, the grey one is 50,000, and it wasn't. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a fraud. It wasn't a Photoshop is the phrase that I'm looking for. It was real. It was absolutely real. And there he was on the White House lawn, essentially working as a Tesla salesman, because a fairly widespread attempt to boycott Tesla, to punish Elon Musk for various reasons, has obviously proved successful. Nothing says that something has proved successful more than the person who's been targeted by a campaign panicking on such a grand scale that he gets his friend the president to start selling cars. I mean, you almost wish they were second-hand, don't you? Because that's the phrase that you'd normally use at this point. Would you buy a second-hand car off this man? Of course, millions and millions and millions of Americans would. Well, actually, they'd buy a cardboard box off this man with wheels drawn on the side of it that he claimed was the fastest car in history. So fast, fastest. Some people say it's the fastest car that has ever been seen, but it's not. It's a cardboard box with some wheels stuck on the side of it. But you know that millions of Americans would buy it. Yesterday, he tried to sell Teslas. And think of the peanut farm while you listen to this.
Hello, President Trump. Are you looking to buy or lease today?
Well, I'm going to buy. And I'm going to buy because, number one, it's a great product, as good as it gets. And number two, because this man has devoted his energy and his life to doing this. I think he's been treated very unfairly by a very small group of people. And I just want people to know that you can't be penalized for being a patriot. And he's a great patriot. And he's also done an incredible job with Tesla. And I mean, nobody else has a car company started up in the last 30 years that's been successful. I don't think so. And not only successful, but super successful. And because he's able to find billions and billions and billions of dollars of fraud and waste and all of the things. I mean, our country is going to be very strong very soon because of a lot of the things that he's done and a lot of the things that I'm doing. And there's no better team, but there's no better for what we're doing. There's nobody like this, and he shouldn't be penalized. And when I watched the other day, I said, I can't believe it. It should be the opposite. People should be going wild, and they love the product, but because he's finding all sorts of terrible things that have taken place against our country, they want to penalize him in an economic sense. And I just think that's very unfair. So I just wanted to make a statement. I'm going to buy one. Now, here's the bad news. I'm not allowed to drive because I haven't driven a car in a long time, and I love to drive cars. But I'm going to have it at the White House, and I'm going to let my staff use it. I'm going to let people at the place use it. And they all are all excited about that. I'm not allowed to use it. Can you believe it? One of my great things in life is that I can, I like to drive cars, but I'm not allowed to.
If it's a very small group of people that are punishing him unfairly, why on earth do they need to go to the trouble of a staged photo opportunity on the White House lawn to try to sell cars? And the note in his hand that I presumed was not real, photographed by a Reuters photographer, literally has on it Tesla pricing, full self-driving, Model X, $112-something thousand, and then all the different types, all the different models. And it's one of those mornings, I think, where we can allow ourselves to wonder what on earth is going on. It's a very, very good pun, swastika, isn't it? Particularly after Elon Musk did the Nazi salutes at that conference. Swastika, where, of course, Liz Truss and Nigel Farage were happy to follow him onto the stage later at the same conference. But the leader of the French far right felt that it would be a little bit inappropriate for him to do so. The heirs of the Vichy regime balking at Nazi salutes, but Nigel and Liz absolutely untroubled by it. It's one of those days where we wonder what is going on. And the reason I mentioned COVID earlier was because at the beginning of COVID, I don't know if you were kind enough to listen. Statistics suggest that you were. But I often found myself wondering, I think this is why the curse of O'Brien kicked in so hard, particularly with regard to Matt Hancock. I never really got it with Boris Johnson, but I may have got a bit of it with Dominic Cummings. The curse of O'Brien is the liberal burden. The burden of decency, when you just want to believe the best of people, even people who are constantly telling you how awful they are. And during those dreadful weeks, much of which I spent broadcasting to you from a shed at the bottom of my garden, during those dreadful weeks, I found it close to impossible to believe that things were quite as chaotic as they appeared to be. You remember when Boris Johnson appeared to say on breakfast television that we should just let it run through the population, even as we were watching the footage coming in from other countries of bodies being, well, forgive me, but piled high. Some of the stories that we heard over the weekend as the anniversary of the outbreak was commemorated were chilling, fresh in the memory and yet somehow also forgotten. So I often sat here and you often agreed with me. We couldn't quite work out what it was, could we? The plan. But we found it really hard to believe that there wasn't a plan at all, that this was just, as Dominic Cummings later described it, a supermarket trolley with a wonky wheel. Do you remember that idea that it is just absolutely impossible to control? There is neither rhyme nor reason to what Boris Johnson and his administration were doing at the time, and similarly to what Donald Trump is doing now. Here's a senior economics reporter on CNBC called Steve Leisman.
I'm going to say this at risk of my job, Kelly, but what President Trump is doing is insane. It is absolutely insane. It is about the 8th reason we've had for the tariffs. And now he's saying he's putting 50% tariffs on Canada unless they agree to become the 51st state. That is insane. There is just no other way of describing it. And the trouble, Kelly, is that it shows there are no bounds around President Trump. This is very different from the first administration, where there were people around him who seemed to, I don't know what the word is, but smooth over some of the edges now. And the other thing that's not talked about, Kelly, is what's going on within the administration in terms of how they're treating the Constitution and laws. I think all of that is bad for the attraction of capital. And the gentleman from Bridgewater is 100% right. We need massive amounts of capital if we want to fund our deficits, pay for the things we want to pay for, sell our bonds, and have high stock prices. And it seems as if this administration is doing everything it can to chase foreign capital away.
Insanity is not a strategy. What was it that the former deputy head of the IMF said to us yesterday? Was it chaos or disruption isn't a glitch, it's a feature? But it's not, is it? Or is it? Insanity is not a strategy. The reason why he would fear for his job is because media owners are bending the knee for Donald Trump. Almost all of them. Not just media owners, but tech platform owners as well, who, for my money, should be treated in more or less the same category, but who cling to some sort of notion of independence or distance from what gets published on their platforms. At least for now they do. The idea that he is just behaving like a showerhead. Have you ever dropped the shower in the bath? You must have done. You know, no? You've probably got a posher shower than me. But, you know, if you've got decent water pressure, maybe in a hotel, you've got decent water pressure in a shower, and you've got a handheld shower head, and you drop it, and you want to try and pick it. Well, okay, imagine trying to pick it up without getting wet, if it's on. So you turn the shower on, it comes out the handheld bit, not the rose at the top. It falls out of the bracket, and it's bouncing around on the bath surface. It's bouncing around on the bottom of the bath. Your job is to pick it up without getting wet. You can't, right? You've got no idea which way it's going to start spraying next. It's a completely random spray of water. That seems to me to be what he's doing. And yet, there are two questions. The first is obvious. Is it just completely chaotic and random? Because even since that journalist gave that speech yesterday, the 50% tariff has been reduced back down to 25%. One Canadian governor threatened to smack even higher tariffs on energy going into the United States of America, going into one particular state, and Trump appears to have backed down. But how do you keep track of this? How does anybody even begin to keep track of this, quotes, madness? Or to quote that senior economics correspondent at CNBC, to quote him, this insanity. Insanity is not a policy platform. And yet with Donald Trump, it seems that it is. So that's the obvious question. Is this just completely random? But who can answer that? Who even knows? We're back to the early days of COVID. We're back to just presuming that there must be some method to this madness. And that's question number one. Is there any method to this madness? 0345 6060 973. And then you can work out for yourself what the second question is. What is it? The EU is now retaliating after they imposed tariffs on steel and aluminium, as I call it, aluminum, as our American friends prefer to describe it. It's bringing in countermeasures on 26 billion euros worth of US goods. We deeply regret this measure, says the European Commission president, but she describes the response as strong but appropriate. They came into effect overnight. It means that US businesses wanting to bring steel and aluminum into the country will have to pay a 25% tax on them. Today they'll have to pay it. So if he's hoping to improve aluminium production or steel production across the United States in the long term, then he's telling these people they're just going to have to suck up incredibly inflated prices in the foreseeable term, in the short term. The UK currently is sitting on its hands, trying to have its cake and eat it. And again, we're back to the consequences of Brexit. We can't really do much on our own, so we have to sort of cross our fingers and hope, doing the only thing they can do and knowing at the same time that it's almost certainly doomed to fail. So we're not doing anything. We're making or saying warm words about possible deals a little bit further down the line, trade deals a little bit further down the line that may or may not materialize. You know that the 25% tariffs on other imports from Mexico and Canada were announced, and then almost immediately an exemption was announced for car makers and some other goods. There's a 20% levy on other Chinese goods. Some people must think this makes sense. Some people must think this might work. But there are two ways into this from our point of view. That's way number one. Is there method to this madness? 0345 6060 973. But if there isn't, this is where we get psychological. Why is he doing this? Why do you think he's doing this? Who's qualified to answer this question? An economics professor or a psychiatrist? Why is he doing this? Why is he behaving in a way that appears to be entirely unhinged? That has normally very measured and serious commentators using words like insane to describe economic policies. I have a particularly deep understanding of Brexit and used words a little bit like that to describe people who seem to believe that it would be good for this country, good for our economy, that it would increase economic growth. But I mean, some of the things Trump is doing at the moment make Brexit look like a brilliant idea. Make Liz Truss look like an economic... No, let's not get carried away. So can you describe what the method in the madness is? And if you can't, why is he doing what he's doing? What do you think the mad plan might be? The analysis that incorporates insanity? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. I can't wait to talk to you today, actually. Don't hold back. If you think you've got something interesting to say, I want to hear it. Because it's one of those mornings where the canvas feels completely blank, right? Completely blank, except for those little water stains from the shower head bouncing around on the bottom of the bath.